Well, joining us now is Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Rae. Ambassador Rae, thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Michael.
So it seems to be that Israel is signaling that any response will not be immediate. And by that, I'm really referencing Minister Benny Gantz here, who says that his country will exact the price when the timing is right. Do you interpret that as Israel exercising the restraint that Western allies are asking from it?
You know, I think this is just an ongoing issue. I don't think you can predict day by day what's going to happen. I wish one could. I don't have the means to tell you what exactly. I think what it means is they're thinking about what to do, which is always better than not thinking about what to do. Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole point of what I've been trying to say for many years is if you respond impulsively to an attack, you're just guaranteeing another impulsive attack on the other side. So you really got to think this thing through. And it's not just about Israel and Iran. It's about Israel and all of its neighbors, including Palestinians. And it's about Israel and all of those people on whom it relies to assist it in its own defense. So I think there's room for conversations, which is better to have breathing space than not to have breathing space. But we have to keep coming back to this point that, of course, Israel is responsible for its own self-defense. But Israel's self-defense requires the assistance of others. So, yeah, if it means that Israel is prepared to talk to others, that's a good thing.
Yeah, and we saw that last night, you know, as you well know, or rather over the weekend, because as you know, the barrage of missiles that came from Iran, they were stopped essentially not only by Israeli forces, but with the participation of the Brits, the Americans, the French, as well as Jordan. But, you know, given that context, what would be an appropriate response here? Because on the one hand, Israel is weighing out what is an appropriate reaction to this attack from Iran, but also what would serve as a deterrent so that Iran does not engage in a similar attack in the future. What would be an appropriate response?
Well, I think the first thing to think about is what can all of us do? And I think that's part of what the Israelis have been asking. What more are you prepared to do to help us deal with the Iran question? And I think we all have an obligation to do that. And I know that's something that our government is considering. Minister Joly has said, in front of the cameras, said that Canada was open to discussing what other sanctions would be possible. And there are a wide range of possible sanctions that can be undertaken. But the point about any sanctions is they're far more effective if they're not just taken by one country, but if they're taken by a group of countries. So there will be some intensive discussions with our American friends, obviously our friends in Europe and elsewhere, about what really can be done and that will be effective. There's no point in just doing something that looks punitive and sounds punitive, but really isn't punitive. It's just symbolic. We don't need any symbolic measures. Whatever we do has to be able to have some impact on Iran. And one has to say that, you know, so far, with oil prices where they are and where they still are, we have not had the ability to really take away from a very significant source of revenue for Iran yet. Maybe that will come.
Mm-hmm. You know, I do wonder, given that Iran does back these entities like Hamas and Hezbollah, and it has a term that it's a term rather that has been debated around Iran, but is it time that Canada treat Iran as a rogue state?
Well, the question is, what does that achieve exactly, Michael? I mean, at some point we have to engage Iran in a variety of ways. Of course, they're a state that behaves in roguish behavior. What it does is unpredictable and roguish and brutal. They're brutal to their own population. They're brutal to their own people. They're brutal to women in their country. They're brutal to political dissidents. They're brutal to people of other religions like Baha'i. They have a history of terrible brutality. But the point is, there still has to be every effort made to ensure that we don't let our anger get in the way of making a clear-headed decision about what to do and how to do it. And I think that's how we have to be thinking. Less about, I can do more than you, or I'm tougher than you, or I'm stronger than you. You're going to do this, I'm going to go even further. Not about the rhetoric one hears in various, assemblies and security councils and everywhere else. It's about doing what we actually believe is going to have a constructive, effective impact on deterring Iran from doing good things, and at the same time, not losing sight for a moment of the broader issue, which is the whole region, what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in all of the regions of the Middle East that need to be addressed on a clear-headed basis.
You use the terminology clear-headed, and Iran says that the missile attack that it engaged in was a defensive action, a response to this April the 1st attack on its embassy in Syria. The dead, as you know, included an Iranian general who reportedly ran covert military operations in both Syria and Lebanon. Was that an attack a mistake, do you think?
I think that there's if you want a distinction, Israel launched a very deadly attack against a small group of people that achieved its target. They broke a lot of rules in doing so. I mean, obviously, it's not in keeping with principles of diplomatic immunity, because they attacked a diplomatic office in the heart of Damascus. But what Iran did was to launch hundreds of missiles, drones, everything else, all over Israel, including on top of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Totally indiscriminate, but also completely ineffective. I'll leave it to others to talk about what is the meaning of all this. But my own view is that Iran is still a very dangerous country. Its behavior is still represents a threat, certainly, to the peace of the region, and in my view, the peace of the world. But at the same time, we have to think about our own responses and what we've been encouraged to do by way of their own responses, which have got a chance of success in a sustainable way. It's one thing to do something that makes you feel better. It's another thing to do something that's actually going to be of consequence and is going to be successful. And I think we have to keep our eye on that pretty critical distinction in public policy. We can all feel better because we've either said or done something. But if in fact it proves the next day to be not a good idea and have had a response that we could never have anticipated, then there hasn't been successful.
Ambassador, I have less than a minute, but I do want to ask this of you, because the Israeli ambassador to Canada hears, it seems, when Canada says it stands with Israel, but what he says is that Canada has to show what it means by standing with Israel. So when you speak to the Israeli ambassador at the United Nations, when you speak to Israeli officials, what do you say to them about what Canada is willing to do to support the country?
Well, we want Israel's security to be sustainable. And that's the key thing. We don't believe that we can have a secure Middle East without a resolution of the conflict with the Palestinians that has gone unresolved for 75 years. We don't believe that the paths that Israeli has been pursuing of ignoring the problem or trying to deal with it in only a half-hearted way, that has got a hope in hell of succeeding. We just don't believe that. And we think we've seen the evidence of that, tragically, very recently. And therefore, we have been encouraging Israel to think about doing things that we think will actually create greater security for their country. At this point, the Israeli government doesn't agree with us. That's fine. But I do think there are a number of countries, as well as Canada, who feel very strongly in a two-state solution, and who feel very strongly that a secure Israel is best protected by having a secure Palestinian state that is living alongside them in a state of peace and in a constructive way. People might say that's impossible, but I will tell you something else. It's impossible for the status quo to continue and to be successful. It has not led to Israeli security. Tell me how decisions that have been made in the last while have actually contributed to Israeli security. They haven't. And so we have to look and see, well, what more can we do that will create the conditions for Israel's security?
Ambassador Bob Ray, always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thank you.